Appamada's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity. Your support really does make a huge difference. You'll find a link for contributions on the website at appamada.org/contribute. Thank you so much.
Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. Well, it's good to see you all here, even though you can't see me, and that's terribly regrettable. I may try to, once we're starting to sew, I may attempt to troubleshoot this further. And Shashi, it's good to see you. I haven't seen you since I left. Yeah, it's nice.
I know, good to see you too.
Nice to be here with you, yeah. Okay, well, Shashi, what we normally do to begin is we go through and do check-ins, regardless of if you're the which cohort you are and how far you are in the progress or in the process. And everyone who has questions, this is a great time to get those addressed, and then we can begin a silent practice period. We do go kind of one at a time, but feel free to begin whatever it is you're working on today. And as usual to everyone, if you haven't had an opportunity to sit today or sit recently, perhaps, maybe do begin with practice stitches before you begin working on anything in the garment itself. Maria, would you care to do the honors as usual?
Oh, yeah. Yes, so I've finished sewing the bottom and the top outer line of the frame.
Great.
I'm beginning the outer lines of the sides of the Rakasu, and I was just saying to everyone before you arrived that I'm just noticing how much I'm enjoying sewing the outer line, because I'm finding it really easy, and how much I don't really like it if it's difficult. Huh. I'm really enjoying this part of the process, and I kind of don't want it to end. It's so nice and just runs so smoothly, and it's like, oh, I like this. So that's where I'm at.
Yes, if only the pleasure was the permanent state that I could call me, right? You know, only if I could look at the pleasurable part of myself and say, yes, that is my soul, that is my spirit. That would be nice. But enjoy it while it's there. I'm glad to hear that you've come into a rhythm there. Okay, Shashi, I see that you're next on my screen, and I just kind of go in arbitrary order based on Zoom. How are you doing with your?
Well, I'm still doing practice stitches. I can't seem to like get them in the same size. Like sometimes I start small and then they get bigger. And then but last week when I was attending in person, I did one line that came out pretty smooth and like consistent size stitches. And I think it was because I was really paying attention to each stitch. But I'm having, so today I started with a little bit small, and then it got a little bigger. And I also have a little bit problem on like actually placing the material where I can be relaxed and see it well. I don't know if I should keep my glasses on and take my glasses off. I haven't figured that out yet. But I'm still working on my stitches being consistently even.
That is a big part of the practice. Yeah. Yeah. Until your body kind of learns it, so that your mind can step away, because it's tricky. But it sounds like you're confident that what you're working on now with the practice stitches is building towards the next steps. Good.
Thank you.
Yes. Let me know if you do have any questions or want any of my tips. If I may not have any, but at any point.
Yeah, I will have. I do have a question, but I can wait later.
No, please. Now's a great time for questions. Yeah.
I mean, like, so when you're holding this, where is it best to hold that your hand stays steady and your stitches stay even?
Sure. I will show. I'll do it with just a needle without thread, because I don't have the needle threaded. So okay. I've got long fingers, which does come in handy. So I've got both hands. I've got my index finger of one hand and my ring finger of that same hand kind of holding this side taut. And then I've got my thumb and my middle or ring finger of that same hand. So that's giving this fabric sort of this taut surface into which I can sew.
Okay, that helps.
Yeah. I'm thinking if it's, let me think about when I'm working on something a little harder to do that with, because you can't, of course.
Yeah, because it's long, right?
Right. I do think we generally stay only a certain distance. You're only ever so far from the very furthest edge of the fabric. Perhaps if I was working here, I would do something similar, where I'm still using these for this kind of 4-point pinch, but I'm going here instead. And I can't think, let's see, if I'm going along this edge, yeah, it ends up being, I think every time I end up sewing with this kind of configuration.
Yeah,
and it
that's
may
helpful.
it may just involve coming from above versus the side or below, kind of doing the best I can. In the fabric, I don't believe, if you have to kind of compress the fabric on one end, it seems unlikely to me that you're going to get a crease so bad that you could not gently press it out or just smooth it once you're done.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
can you try that and let me know if that?
Yes, yeah, that helps. Yeah, that helps, because it was the holding of it, because it was kind of like limpy. It was like going like this, and so if I hold it and it's kind of little, like gives it a little tight, yeah,
that taut surface.
Yeah,
great.
Thank you, John.
Of course. Trudy, how are y'all?
Thank you. I finished the envelope for the Rakasu that I've sewn for Catherine, and I'm going to go and sit with her in a couple of weeks' time, and she's going to do the pine needle stitch on the neck piece. So we're going to sit together in her garden so she can do that. And so now I'm on the envelope for the Rakasu that Anne has sewn for me. So I'm just hoping to get that. It's a little unbalanced, the one I've sewn. It's a little, got a slight wonk to it, works, but it's not perfect. So maybe this one.
Please let me know how that goes for you.
Okay, thank you. Mary,
how about you? Oh, yes.
Hi.
Have we met? Oh, I think you joined Trudy once, and you had, but my memory is failing me today.
Yeah, I logged on once from my house.
Yes, that's right.
So yeah, we saw each other on the screen.
It's so disorienting to see you here with Trudy. It's like you're a whole different person. It's a different setting. I almost know your background as well as I know you.
Yes, yes, I know. You get to know people through their background. Yes, well, I only live around the corner and I'm here because I think I need a bit of in-person help. I'm still trying to get the stitches, the practice stitches remotely even. My stitches are dreadful. I'm hoping today to make some improvement with that.
Well, you've got a great guide with you.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, I trust you're in great hands. Let me know if you have any questions for me.
Thank you.
Of course. Hillary, how about you?
I've stalled a bit because I didn't have much choice of colors of silk from the place that, places I'd been looking, and I didn't like the color that had come. And when you said okay to Julia for 3 other colors, I ordered one of those, 315, and it should have come on the 1st, which would have meant I could have started doing my stitches on the pieces that I pinned last week, but it hasn't come yet, inevitably. So basically what I'm going to do is, with the silk color that I don't like particularly, I'm going to carry on just doing practice stitches, because although, you said they were good, the ones that I did before, they were with cotton, cotton thread, not silk. And I think I do need more practice. So what I'm going to do today is just sit here and listen to the wisdom and practice stitches and try and get them a good distance apart, because I'm not sure my distance apart is right yet. And I find I've got a tendency to go smaller and smaller, so I don't want to get them too small, and that I've got about 6 stitches for every 2 millimeters. Sometimes when talking to Julia before she went on holiday, because she's going to miss the next 3, I think, because of her holiday, she reckoned that you're aiming for 5 stitches for every 2 millimeters. Don't know what your thoughts are on that one.
2 centimeters. Yeah, roughly that.
Yeah, sorry, 2 centimeters.
You might have very good eyes, better than mine. It would look at some point. I think you'd be embroidery of that though.
Yeah, so no, I meant 2 centimeters because she did all the maths from the distance apart they should be. So if they were 4 millimeters apart, then it would be 5 stitches for every 2 centimeters.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
They can be 3 to 4 millimeters apart. So 6 is probably okay, but I don't want to get tighter. I don't want to get more in than 6.
Sure, I think that's a reasonable thought. You might consider kind of an optional practice, just the first one, just to get it in your hand this sitting. Actually do measure out and mark the distances, if that was how I learned distances.
I'm going to do that because Julia said that she was really struggling with getting her distances right, and so she marked it out. Now that, thanks to Trudy, I've got a decent chalk pen, I can actually, because I got one that was really weird and the chalk just fell out and it was way too big. I can now mark the dots every 2 centimeters, so that's what I'm going to do.
And Shelley, how are you?
I'm good. I think based on what Hillary just said, my stitches might be a little close. I've got about 8 in 2 centimeters. I should have 6.
6 is kind of the tighter end. 3 to 4. I think if you're getting a little 2.5 millimeters, it might be okay. But 3 or 4 is kind of the target. And the only downside is that there's a lot of stitches to do here. And if they're too close together, it's just a lot more stitches for you to do.
Okay. So I have finished sewing all of the individual 5 pieces and I'm ready to join the panels. But I just wanted to report in on my experience of doing the stitches because what I discovered was that when I was going with the rhythm of the chant as I was stitching and paying attention to what I was doing, my stitches were very good. And when the chant became the back, like happening in the back, and my brain drifted, they weren't good. Or when I was thinking too hard about the stitches, then I was messing up. So to me, the rhythm of the chant is just really important, to hold your present moment experience and still be doing it loosely, you know, like anyway, I was quite fascinated.
Yeah. Wow. It sounds like almost by holding the chant and the attention on sewing, you couldn't hold either one too closely. And so you were able, thank you. No, that sounds like a really nice experience. It sounds.
It was, it felt very deep. It feels very deep when I'm doing this, as opposed to when I sit in Zazen, I can be drifting. Like, it's just nice to have something to focus my attention on. It takes me to a different place.
Great. That's
and
good.
I definitely need help with the pinning of these pieces together, because I don't get it.
Sure. Yeah, that was going to be my goal for today. You're not the only person at this phase. So I'm going to try to have an example to show you. I need to sew one more line of stitches, but once I'm done with that, I'll demonstrate that here in about 20 minutes probably. Okay. Then we can do a bit of silent practice. Of course, if you have questions, Shelley, for you, I will make an effort to be judicious in getting this done, and then I can demonstrate panel to panel attaching.
I'll just do practice stitches to get this distance right while you're doing that, no problem.
Cool. Shashi, I'm realizing that I also do something else that I did not mention. So right now, as I'm sewing, I've got my thumb on top, my index on bottom, and then I'm using the pinky of my sewing hand and the middle finger again. So it's still the same idea of using four points to create that taut line, but it's not always all my left hand doing it. That sometimes I'm using my right hand to create that fourth point.
What? Yes, it's very helpful for me to see your sewing, the way you're doing it.
I'm glad.
John, I'm watching what you're doing and I'm really confused I'm trying to transpose it in my head from when I've sewn these, when I've sewn the lines that I've pinned, when my thread comes, I can't remember how the folds work, but I'm looking at your folds and fiddling with 1A and 1B that I've got pinned, and I'm thinking, I can't work out how you get to what I'm seeing on the screen.
Let me see if I've got, this is kind of the second phase. So what you probably have is this, right? Where you have your 1A pinned second line of the A piece
Yeah.
for the first line of the B piece. So what you're seeing, and this one's flipped, but you're seeing what happens once this is sewn, then this is folded over, and then this seam allowance is folded under.
Okay.
Did you mention that you're a pretty global learner? Was that you? Someone last week mentioned that
No, I don't
being
quite know what a global learner would be, actually.
being able to that just getting detailed step by step is your brain isn't able to piece together the why you're doing it the way you're doing it until you understand the bigger picture. Was that you or
That
no,
was
it
okay,
wasn't
thank
me.
you, Maria.
It wasn't me, but you know, I do like to kind of feel it and see it as well, which is why I'm fiddling with my piece to try and understand, because I thought I got where the fold was last time.
You have a hard time doing it with your pieces if they're currently pinned this way,
Yeah,
just because you're not able to do this fold step.
yeah.
You're not able to, because
No, I
it
get it
really
now.
is.
Actually, John, I get it now.
Okay.
Thank you. I've worked out what you mean, because I was doing it backwards, and I thought, well, you can see your lines, and the way I'm trying to do it, you can't see the lines. So yeah, I know now. Thank you.
Good.
I just have to try and remember it.
Yes.
Thank you.
John, I wanted to ask you a question.
Yeah. Yes.
So is there are we supposed to finish this by the end of the year or by a certain time?
No. Appamada doesn't have a timeline.
Oh, okay. Because it may take me a while.
That's okay. With including the not meeting with Peg due to COVID, it took me almost 3 years, I think, maybe longer, to get my first one done.
Well, that makes me feel so much better.
Good. There is a Austin Zen Center there in Austin. They do have a 1-year time limit. When you start your precept study, and then you're expected to be ready for Jukai roughly 1 year later. And there's always a kind of a rush at the very end where they have to it's this slow, deliberate pace, and then it has to become kind of extra long sessions. But on the other end, if you do a sewing session ever, you can sew an entire rakusu in about 3 or 4 days.
I didn't know they have a sewing session.
I don't think anyone in Austin has done it, but the San Francisco Zen Center family of Tasahara and then Green Gulch, they do them sometimes.
Oh, I think once I get my stitches consistent, then I'll be ready.
Yeah. I'm sure having Anna available as a resource in person too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I don't think I would have been able to get my pieces cut or all that without her. Yeah.
One other thing, I guess, about the way I'm sewing this, once I'm going, what I was showing about the 4 points, I really only do that when I'm starting, I realize. And now, so my index finger of my left hand, oops, I'm off camera, is pressing against the index finger of my right hand right now. So I can feel the fingernail of my left finger. So that's one point. And then the other point is now my middle and ring. And what I do is, so I go in, and then I'm actually going to watch. I'm looking for where the let me see if I can get the angle so you see it. I'm looking for how my needle pokes the material out, and that's how I know how long the stitch is going to be. So I can tell without even having to puncture that if I always go past, so I insert, and then I'll go all the way to like here, which would be like a 6 centimeter long stitch or millimeter, and I actually then start backing up until I get to where I want. And that's been a helpful tool to me. I can only do it in really good light though. I've sewn on an airplane before. Yeah. I sewed on an airplane once and I just had to keep stabbing because I couldn't see the bend in the material.
John, this is
Yes.
Marla. May I ask you a
Hi,
quick
Marla.
question
Welcome.
about, thank you, about basting the X's on the frame?
Yes.
The instructions say at the tip of the triangle, skip across with loose stitch.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Let me see if I can demonstrate that. That is basically saying that you want a little bit of extra material. You want a little bit of extra thread that when you invert this, when you turn it inside out, it won't pull tight. You won't see like a weird, pinch in your material. So let me try to demonstrate this.
So my understanding of this, let's just see if I'm right, would be to kind of go from inside one point to across on the inside of the other point without messing with the tip.
Basically, and then also leaving a little bit of extra thread in that bit of the
slack.
The loop. Yes, slack, exactly. Yeah, that's I think I can probably get this done pretty quickly.
I get it.
You get it?
Well, I'd love to see it.
This is a kind of a fast and nasty way to
So you
do it.
don't go all the way to the actual tip, but pretty close.
Pretty close. And I don't think it matters if you're finishing under or over the material. Okay. So I'm going to stay under and not try to do another over. So I'm going to go, that's my line there. So I'm going to go just outside of it. And when I pull this taut, that's when I'm paying attention to that slack. So
got it.
I'm going to leave about that much slack. And I think to scale, this is actually about the distance that you would do from this line to that line on the full scale. So if just imagine these lines are longer and it's pretty much the exact same, I would leave this much slack in the full size one as well.
Perfect. I'm so glad I asked. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
Oh, but John, just one thing. In your example that you just showed, there wasn't the seam allowance wasn't represented.
It wasn't, I didn't hera it, but that I did stay inside the seam allowance. I
mean, at the tip, does the tip go through the seam allowance? Because I have seam allowance around the end. Oh, it's just that one on the end.
Just that first corner?
Yeah, that first one.
So let me double check. I think you ignore it and you stay all on the top side. So in this case, I would actually stay entirely, let's use this side since the pin. So I would go inside the seam allowance and then I would stop before this seam allowance, jump on the same side. So I would come up, use a pen.
I think I know what you mean. Yeah, there is seam allowance on that raw end.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So come up that last time, just shy of the seam allowance, and then go down the other side,
Got
just
it.
shy of the seam allowance.
Just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Good question. Thank you. All right, Shelley, I'm about 2 minutes from being able to show this.
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay. So this is going to be, I'm just going to narrate the demonstration for connecting these two pieces. If you're not here and you just want to watch, you're welcome to do so. This will also be, of course, on recording. Okay. So first, this is piece 3A, or you should be 3A instead of 1A. And I'll describe the full layout. So as before, the so the order in which these are connected, the piece 3A is always on top of piece 4A. 4A is on top of 5A. So it goes downhill from 3A. Likewise, it goes downhill from 3A in the other direction. So 3A, 2A, 1A will be one on top of the other. And I don't think it makes a big difference the order in which you attach them. 1 through 5 is often the traditional way, but I think it's also fine if you want to start from 3. So do whatever makes the most sense to you, which may be too permissive. I'm going to demonstrate 3 to 4 because those are the pieces that I have handy, but this is an analogous process, and I'll try to speak in terms that generalize well. So if you remember, going back to just a few weeks ago when I was talking about how the second line of the top piece goes to the first line of the bottom piece, and that A is on top of B. The reason I separated those two instead of just saying the second line of A goes to the first line of B is because the second line of the top piece going to the first line of the bottom piece also applies here. So the process for connecting 3 to 4 is more or less the same as connecting A to B. I'll demonstrate that here shortly. First, I do want to remind that if you're part of the current cohorts, you should have this little assembly included in your material. And if you would like, I think if you wanted to remove just this line of staples, the final line of staples here where you see on the video, these, if you wanted to remove these 3 or however many there are, you can kind of get a view similar to this view, kind of to demonstrate this connection. So you should have this if you're in the current cohorts. So just like before, I'm going to use the pinch and lift method. And I want, so 3 is going to be on top of 4. 4 is on top of 5. 3 is on top of 2. And 2 is on top of 1. So starting with 3 in this case, I'm going to pinch so that the right side of the material is on either side, and you have the backs of the material, the wrong side, to facing each other. So wrong side to wrong side. So pinch and lift. And as before, I'm going to go ahead and put it so that the top piece is on top, just because that makes the most sense to me. And I want to move this top piece down until this second line of A, or sorry, the second line of the top piece roughly aligns with the first line of the bottom piece. So I'm going to do that. Just pull it down. And you can see on here, I'm roughly 1 centimeter away from, there's roughly 1 centimeter there at that seam allowance. And the same roughly on the other side. Let me straighten these back up because I kind of splayed them to demonstrate. And as before, you're going to be using these lines as guides. You want these lines to be parallel, or you want to do line to line, front to back. However, to adding some complexity, the first time you're going to have to work with, but not the last, the first time you'll have to work with how things shift as you're sewing. So if I introduced, if I in the process of folding this, if I folded more material into this little bundle here, this piece will now be shorter than the piece behind it, which means that these seam allowance lines, which were originally drawn at the same time, because these are all external seam allowance lines, theoretically they should be straight, but I may have used more material here than I used here. So these may not be straight. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on being parallel. That's the first thing. So even if these lines are not exactly line to line once you begin putting a pin through, even if they're not exactly line to line, you do want them to be parallel. So that's one thing. And the second thing is we want to distribute any difference. And let me see if I have anything handy to demonstrate what I'm talking about. Don't really, nothing that immediately jumps out to me is making sense to my brain. What I mean by distribute difference is if, say, the distance from here, from this seam allowance to this seam allowance line is exactly 10 centimeters, and the one behind it is 10.4 centimeters. I could either do exactly line to line here, and that would leave 0.4 or 4 millimeters difference on this end. Or I could do 2 millimeters of that difference on this end and 2 millimeters of difference on the other end. And when you want to distribute that difference, you want, if possible, to split the difference between the two sides so that one side is not way off in relative to the other. Let me pin and see if I can actually demonstrate this with my own real example, if there's any variance to describe. You won't know until you've started pinning, so let's just start. So as before, you're going to do almost line to line. You're going to be just in the seam allowance of the bottom piece. So I'm going to go through this top piece here. Let's see where I came out. Okay, so I was in the seam allowance, but I was a little off the vertical line. Or in this case, yeah, I'm a little off the reference line, the line that I'm doing line to line. So I'm going to go ahead and move my needle till it's roughly wanted to maybe 1.5 millimeters in my case. Oh, and I pulled it too far out on this side, so let me repin. If it is helpful for you to do what I'm doing now, to pick it up and hold them vertically, by all means do that. You don't need to keep it down on the table. I do that because it's easiest to display on video. Okay, so I'm gonna try to back this out of just that bottom piece of material so that I can just barely reposition it. Still not quite where I want it. Okay, that's pretty good. And I've gotten this all cattywampus. I'm gonna try to get that relatively straight before I try to make these. If you remember from a previous video, you want the pin to be exactly perpendicular in both directions. So that as you turn it, it should just stay completely perpendicular to the material. And that's how you know you've got the front and back material lined up relative to each other in the correct way. Okay. And then I'm going to go through this back line and see where it comes out on the front line. It's a little bit off. I need to adjust.
So,
yeah,
John,
go ahead.
can I just ask? So on the side that's going to be the top. So in this case, it's 3A. You're right on the chalk line. But when
That's
you
right.
flip the piece and you're on the 4A side, you're just inside the seam allowance.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
So I've got this first side. And you know, I probably could have measured the two before I started, and that would have been wise and prudent. So maybe learn from my mistake and take a straight edge. It's not long enough. Be right back. $16 centimeters and a little bit of change, less than a millimeter. This one's, oh yeah, this is a perfect example. So this one, instead of, wait, am I measuring right, the correct lines? Give me a moment. Oh no, 16.4 and 16.4. Okay, so there's very little variance for me. I hope there's very little variance for you too. But if one of these had been more than, let's say, 2 millimeters difference, if you have more than 2 millimeters difference, go ahead and do it so that half of the difference will be on one side in one seam allowance and half the difference in the other seam allowance. And if you are listening to this and you have my email and this doesn't make any sense, feel free to reach out if you do have that difference or that variance, because this is I don't have a proper way of demonstrating it in a way I'm confident most could follow along. I'm going to trudge forward. So got that one. I'm satisfied with its placement. I'm going to try to do it again on this side. And I have, as I've been working, I've been trying to keep these two both fairly taut, not so taut that I'm introducing any sort of strain on the material. Okay, so pretty good in terms of I'm right, just looking at the distance along this vertical line here. I'm just, looks like I'm just below it on this side. And I'm just below it on that side. So yeah, very little variance in this. I do think I am further in the seam allowance on this side than I was on the other. On the other side, I came out a little closer to that line. So I'm going to redo this real quick. Try to back it up. So I'm just trying to back out of just the back material, but not the front. Requires kind of a steady eye and hand. May not be worth the effort. Okay, I'm satisfied with that. Pretty much straight on directly through that cross, and then out just a little bit in that seam allowance. Looks like I'm still a tiny bit off, but not so much that it needs to be redone. I'm going to go straight through, directly through this seam allowance line, and pretty good. Looks like there's a little bit of an angle on this side, and it reflects on this side. It does go up a little bit, so I'm not hugely, oh, wait a minute. Okay, yes, it's going, oof, had a little brain twister moment there. Okay, so I'm satisfied that those two are doing a decent job of getting these two seam allowances lined up. So now I'm going to put in a few more pins. I definitely recommend targeting a pin around this and around the same these I don't know what to call this folded section. I'm going to go straight through the middle this time. I don't remember how I've taught it in the past, but this time I'm going to go. So I do get, yep, that's a consistent amount. The reason I'm doing this is just because if this is off in this direction, so if this section was skewed this way, it might be more visible or apparent later on. So I'm going to try not to do that. Let's see where this one ends up. So it was a little far into the seam allowance, and I want to examine why that happened. Was it because I was twisting them relative to each other? What happens if I shift them a little bit? It's such a small amount that it probably won't. So I'm looking at how flat this can lay, minus where the pins are. And then I'm going to look at how flat. Okay, everything looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in. And from here, you don't need to be quite as meticulous, but you can put in another pin, maybe 3 more. So 1 here, 1 here, and 1 here. More if you would prefer, but I think this is a good minimum. Let's do a quick check. I might have gone into an angle on this one. It's okay. So I'm just a tiny bit on this side of the line. I'm a little too far into that seam allowance. Let me see if I can just like with the A piece to the B piece, what I'm trying to do most is have a consistent amount of, I'm trying to be a consistent distance from this line to where the pin is coming out. One thing that may be helpful, and I offer as a kind of a voluntary thing that you can choose to do, is if you would like to draw in a second line and just be very, very clear with yourself. Maybe even take a note if you have to, if you know if you've got some travel coming up and it may be a while before you sew again, but you want to remember this, you can even draw in a second line that is that, 1 to 3 millimeters in the seam allowance, just to simplify this process of aligning. It's also a little bit of variances here will probably not show in the finished garment. So I have never done that, but that might actually be a useful thing for me to use as a teaching tool. You heard it here first, folks. So I'm just going to add one more pin, but that is roughly how you attach the panels to sew them together. And if you notice, this is exactly analogous to A piece to B piece, except what the top piece is, so to speak, has changed. So I did offer the additional guidance as well to start with your pins in these folded over sections after you've done the 2 end pins, and then add just 3 more for a little bit of extra security. So for having pinned it this way, I'm gonna sew. I would choose to sew, and this is a personal preference thing. I always want to have the needles pointing towards me because my hand tends to do this motion as I sew. But I don't think, if you're comfortable that you won't stab yourself and injure yourself or anything, it would be okay to come from this direction as well, as you prefer. I think, Shelley, you're the only person at this phase in this in our current group. Do you have any questions?
No, I realized though that I was pinning in the opposite direction, so I had to repin. Your pinning works way better than my pinning.
Okay, so you're saying that pinning.
I was doing it along the line.
Oh, okay. This way?
Yes, that way, which actually was kind of helpful to first line it up. But to sew it wouldn't have worked. So I've adjusted now, so that makes sense.
That might actually be, you've given me an interesting idea. So if I've got this first pin only, that it could be really valuable to do one pin going in the direction of the line down here, just for the sake of seeing how it aligns. That might actually be a really good tool.
I think I will.
Could transition.
Yeah, doing the first one that way was really helpful to me to get it lined up, and then switching to have all of the pins going in the direction I was going to sew was really good. So when I'm joining these sections, I'm sewing each one as I go, or I'm trying to join everything together before I start to sew.
So you're talking about sewing down this second, whether or not you're going to sew down the second one before you proceed?
I was wondering if I had to try to pin everything together loose like this and then pin the second bit.
No. So
okay.
For these, you're going to do for each time that you're attaching one group of pieces to another group of pieces, you're going to first sew this line, then you're going to do the next, the opening it up this way, and then you're going to fold under this seam and then pin and sew that as well. all before moving on to the next piece.
Excellent. Thank you.
Great question. Oversight on my part. Out of curiosity, I am going to go straight through this seam allowance just to try to get a sense of how much skew has been introduced. Yeah, a fair amount. So when I did not, I mentioned, I think last class or perhaps the one before, when I demonstrated how to fold these under and sew these down, I mentioned that this is a step that you should be pressing. You should be using an iron. I'm a bad teacher and I did not take my own. You can see that's not been pressed because it's got quite a lot of, so I think I introduced more variants. That said, don't be too proud to unpin and try repinning. If both sides are similarly skewed, that's a pretty good indication that the skew was not introduced because these lines did this. Because if these lines did this skew and this skew, okay, so that's what happened. You can see that this one came out and went in straight through that line, and it came out straight through that line. But on this side, it went in through the line and out above the line. So that means that these two lines were sewn at an angle, and that's where that variance was introduced. And that's okay. This is a totally normal part of the process, and there are steps as you proceed that will make up for that. You're going to actually redraw this line before you move on to the frame. So it's totally okay if this does happen. But if I had seen that this one was above, so it came out 1.5, 2 millimeters above the line, if this one also came out that same distance above that line, I would take these pins out and attempt to repin. Maybe use Shelley's suggestion or what we've learned from Shelley to vertical, to do some pins this way to try to align a little bit better. You can also add in sort of these support pins further along. I think it would be very, very unlikely for pins on this seam allowance line to ever, if there was a visible hole remaining after you pulled it out, that even if that happened, that it would be visible on the finished garment, because it does get, you can't even see that seam allowance line here any longer on a finished piece. Okay.
Can I see the back of your piece? I want to see the back side of the stitches.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So this is a whole slew of examples. You can even see some, that's a reinforced stitch there.
Can you turn it over?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
My stitches seem to go at an angle a little bit more than just straight in the back side.
Mm-hmm.
Yours seem
more like
more
these?
straight. Yeah, more like that. Yeah.
That's usually because the stitches themselves are longer. So if I took a ruler at that angle next to that and compared it to maybe that one there, and my guidance on this is the Japanese, one of the Japanese names for this stitch is the grain of rice stitch. So if it ever looks, if there's, that there are long grain rices that are about that, proportion. But if it ever looks long, like if it's ever longer than you could imagine a shrunken down grain of rice looking, that's an indication that that's not the proportion that we're that's traditionally been used.
Okay. Can you turn over this long one more time? No,
Yeah.
the other one. The other one.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
I think this was from demonstration for the previous cohort. I think this was the demonstration piece I was using for Maria, Marla, Trudy's cohort. Although Trudy, I don't know if you count. You were, I mean, you were, but you had already started, right? Before I began. No, you hadn't? Okay, well then you're part of the cohort. My apologies for.
No, that's all right. I started with everyone, fortunately.
Yeah.
She's just very fast, John.
She's so fast. Yeah, I thought that she, yeah. Well, I'm sure Catherine will appreciate.
Probably skilled is the right word. Very skilled.
Well, it's interesting. Yes and no.
Well, I finished my outer line.
Yay!
Yeah, congratulations.
So is it the tricky little squares next, isn't it? As the
That's
call.
the tricky little squares. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I might wait till next time to begin. I've got a blank square, so I'm assuming I have to draw all the lines on.
Down.
So to mark them out. That'll be my next
Yeah.
step.
Well,
Marking out.
you're really getting.
Yeah. So if you have, does yours have the seam allowance, or is it longer than this?
It's
piece?
just a blank. Hang on, I'll just a
Is it the
blank.
correct size? Okay, it looks a little large, so you'll have to measure
Right.
all of that.
Okie dokie. So that's the next bit, measuring.
I think I covered that 4
it's
weeks
on one
ago.
of the videos, isn't it? Before, not too long ago, I don't think you did that. So I can have a look at that and mark it out as I go along. I might just have a quick look now at it and see.
Yeah, these are quite a thing. Quite a tricky little squares indeed. It's well said.
Oh, yeah, if Lynne found them tricky, they're tricky.
Yes.
She's a really good sewer.
But once the squares are done, that's really the last tricky bit of actual sewing in terms of the stitch difficulty of the stitch. There's some other tricky stuff with the straps. These are probably the trickiest part. Unfortunately, they come after you've already built up all this experience with the rest of the Rakasu.
Yeah, thank goodness.
Yeah.
Is it the Namu Butsu stitch around the tricky little square?
You say is it?
Once you've basted it and then stitching it, is it the Namu Butsu?
It is. Although mine have always ended up a little crowded.
Yeah.
They're really hard. I've never seen someone where they look quite to the same level as their face pieces. I've never seen them look quite the same. So definitely a lot of generosity in the interpretation of what is satisfactory here.
Yeah. I shall keep that in mind.
Good.
Strongly.
And if you ever theoretically, you should be able to remove just this line of stitches or just this line of stitches and the corners to replace either the front or the back if either ever gets ruined for some reason and you ever need to replace them. So there's always a chance that you'll get a second go if you wear it long enough and it gets worn enough.
Right. That's good to know. I'm already looking at parts of it now and thinking, oh, I could redo that line.
No, well, if it's not worn, do you need to?
Well, I'm going to wait right up until October when we're having the Rakasu ceremony with Flint in October. And if I have time, but I think we're sending it off in September. Oh, you muted, Trudy. I think it's September.
Yeah. I think the very beginning of September is the latest that we should be sending them.
Right. Do we have to have the envelope done before?
No, I don't think so. So I'm going to just check with Flint, but I think if we can send them off, because the envelope doesn't require any input from him. So I think it's he needs the Rakasus.
Oh, that's good to know, because it feels like a huge amount to do for September.
Yeah.
Maria, I was also thinking about redoing some of my initial stitches because they're a little bit longer. And then I thought, really, they show the progression of my my progress, and so I'm going to leave them because I think they're important.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying, it's like different parts of the Rakasu. I can really see I was in different places when I was sewing them, you know, more centered in other stitches, less centered in others. It's kind of really sort of maps my mind as I've gone along. But I'm just thinking, you know, as I keep having this feeling. I had a dream actually. I sent my Rakasu to Flint and it arrived back in the post. Not good enough. So I hope that's not a premonition. I mean, has anyone ever
No.
had it sent back? I mean, even if is it a Rakasu that's been what you would class as not very, very good at all, wasn't sent back, wasn't rejected?
I've seen Rakasu sewn by people with their very different neurology, and that limited their ability to follow instructions sometimes. And to have the dexterity and precision that you see in others. And no, there was no issue. I think if I haven't, you know, wagged my finger about something, then you can trust that it will be accepted just fine. That's my role here. I'm not teaching the Dharma, but I am helping to get a Rakasu that passes muster.
Yeah. I think it'll be okay.
I think it will be too. I can't imagine Flint being harshly judgmental. And well, no, I don't want to say personal details. Trudy, do you? Oh, sorry, Maria. I don't mean to change the subject.
Oh no, it's fine. You carry on.
Trudy, do you plan on doing any sort of? Well, let me preface this. There is traditionally a Rakasu completion ceremony that the sewing teacher leads with the person who has finished the robe. And do you want to know how to do that for Catherine?
Oh yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes,
I can send that.
Such a thing. That would be lovely.
We haven't actually done one with this remote group yet. Lynne Flocky was going to be the first to finish her own Rakasu and envelope. And sorry, not Lynne Flocky, Lynn Moore. And she hasn't been by recently. So not a chance yet. But yeah, would you like me to verbally describe it or just send you an email of the form?
If you could send me an email, that would be lovely. And then if I've got any questions, can I get back to you?
Yeah, please.
Oh, that sounds joyous.
I think it sounds nice. Yeah, the language of the the process does say you say student's name using a pattern created by Buddha and Ananda. You have sewn Buddha's robe. If you want to change the language on that as appropriate, I think that's totally fine.
Okay.
I also think with the donation kind of process, I think it's also fine if you wanted to keep that in.
Okay. Oh,
but I'll send it it as is, and I trust your judgment.
Thank you very much. I think we're both feeling very. She has a beautiful sort of gazebo in her garden, and she wants to, because she's been walking often as we're sewing, as a way of kind of staying in contact. And I've been sending her photographs and telling her where I'm up to on the Rakasu. So it's kind of felt like a shared experience. So that'll be a lovely way to complete.
So what has she been doing while you've been working?
She's been walking, doing kindling,
walking.
in her garden.
And
Wow.
saying
And
the Namu Butsu as she's doing the kindling.
I'm thank you for telling me that. I've been looking for ways to help sewers or people who for whatever reason can't sew one themselves but would like one, a way for them to engage in the process, and that sounds like a really wonderful way.
Yeah, so she's really not every time but quite often, and I've been keeping her up to date with where I am with it, and yeah, sending her photographs and things, so it's
like
felt
being
very shared.
like being a surrogate.
Yes.
Yes.
It's like when she's doing the chanting the stitch, the Namakabutsu, as she's walking, it's like sowing the ground, isn't it? It's like a really wonderful way of kind of connecting with the sewing.
Okay, we're at the end of our hour here together. Thank you all for joining. I hope to see you all again next week. One to the altar and one to each other. And for me, this week it's both in the same direction, so bear with me.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you.
Lovely to see you.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.